Travelers of Reddit, what are some of the creepiest/scariest experiences you've had abroad? Story 1. I was traveling in Nicaragua a few years ago when I got lost late at night. With no idea how to get back, I flagged down a taxi to take me to my hostel. At first, everything seemed fine until we pulled up to my stop. The driver suddenly locked the doors and demanded way more money than we had agreed on. My heart sank. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. After a tense few minutes, he finally let me out, but only after taking every bit of cash I had. Shaken, I ran inside and told the hostel staff what happened. Their faces went pale. They told me I was lucky. Just days earlier, another traveler had taken a taxi at night. The driver attacked her and dumped her by the roadside. She was found barely conscious by students on their way to school the next morning. That night taught me a hard lesson. Sometimes the scariest moments in travel aren't about getting lost in a foreign city. They're about the people you end up having to trust. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I was on a train in Athens, traveling alone, when a group of men tried to push me off at a stop. Luckily, 3 women saw what was happening and started yelling at the men. They pulled me back onto the train. It all happened so fast that I didn't realize what was going on until one of the women, who spoke English, explained that the men were trying to take me. The women made sure I made it safely back to my hostel, and they advised me not to wear shorts and a tank top while alone in the city. Story 3. I'll never forget that harrowing trip through the Indian mountains. As our bus rounded a sharp curve, we came face to face with another bus on the other side, just a foot away. Both drivers slammed on the brakes and started laughing and joking with each other, relieved to have avoided a collision. But then, about 15 minutes later, we witnessed a truly shocking sight. An old bus from the 80s had careened off the road and tumbled down the mountainside. It was an intense and nerve-wracking experience, one I won't soon forget. Story 4. It was 1992 and I was making my way up the stairs to the ticket booths in the Warsaw, Poland Central train station. Suddenly, a man came tumbling down the stairs, coming to rest just a few steps above where I was standing. To my shock, I saw a long screwdriver protruding from his abdomen. Story 5. One of my good friends in Zimbabwe had a terrifying encounter. While out, they were suddenly grabbed at gunpoint and forced into a van. Thankfully, the criminals did not harm them further. They simply drove them to an ATM and made them empty their bank account. After that, the kidnappers left my friend somewhere on the outskirts of town. It could have ended so much worse, but I'm just relieved my friend made it through that ordeal safely. Story 6. While hiking in Juarez, Peru, I was warned to keep a close eye on my gear, as local people and even foxes might try to take items left around the campsite. So we made sure to tidy up the area extra thoroughly, packing all our belongings into the tent and under the rain fly. After a long day of hiking, we settled in for the night, but in the middle of the night, our tent started shaking violently. I woke up in a panic, thinking we were being robbed. I started yelling and shouting. Part of the tent was pushed in deeply. When I managed to get outside, I came face to face with a cow that had wandered into the tent ropes and gotten startled. We were incredibly lucky that the cow didn't step down into the tent and hurt us. Story 7. My family and I were on a trip to Croatia. As we were driving to the beach, we pulled over for a quick bathroom break. When we opened the car door, our dog jumped out first and ran into the field next to the road. Suddenly, my mother started shouting the dog's name. That's when we noticed a sign just 10 meters away. It warned that the field was an old minefield. Thankfully, our dog made it back to the car safely, and nothing bad happened. Story 8. I was on the Paris metro when a group of 3 people pickpocketed me. I'm always paranoid about losing my wallet, so I'm constantly checking myself. When I realized my wallet was missing, I made a bigger scene than the pickpockets were causing. They had shoved me into one of their friends and were trying to convince people that I had knocked him down. I stopped the train from leaving the station, and another passenger went to get the conductor and security. I guess the pickpockets didn't like that because they ended up giving me back my wallet and took off running. This event still really freaks out my wife. Story 9. It was late at night in Barbados as I walked along a main road near the beach. Suddenly, I came across a man carrying a white bucket. "Hi, I'm Bush," he said. Bush had plants in the bucket and a machete with him. He asked if I had any food, like rice, that I could share. I told him I didn't have any food, but I did have some marijuana I could offer. I had bought it from some kids at the beach the night before. "Follow me," Bush replied. I followed him off the road into an empty lot, down a back alley with a sleeping man on a wall and some broken down cars. We reached a dead end, and Bush went inside a door, bringing out 2 chairs. Turns out this was his mother's place. I noticed a small garden all around, made from the plants Bush had collected in his bucket. We sat down and started smoking. After taking a few puffs, Bush coughed and said, "Ugh, this stuff is shit. You feed this to the sheep." Story 10. My friend and I were flying from Vietnam to Malaysia on the day that the Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 disappeared. We were waiting at the gate, watching the whole situation unfold on the televisions throughout the airport. It was a shocking and unsettling experience, especially since we were booked on a Malaysia Airlines flight ourselves. The tickets were pricey for our backpacker's budget, and the airline wasn't offering any refunds. But we told ourselves that maybe they'd be extra careful now, so we might actually be safer. Still, we felt pretty anxious the entire 2-hour flight until we finally touched down. Story 11. I was traveling through the mountains of the Philippines with a friend who was a very large person. As we approached a checkpoint, we saw soldiers searching cars. The soldiers were wearing mismatched clothing and didn't have any insignia on their uniforms or vehicles. They searched all of our bags and questioned the driver in the local language, which we didn't understand. We heard them mention the word American and realized we were the only Americans on the bus. After discussing something for a while, they finally waved us through. Later, we told the story to another American, who said we had passed through an area controlled by rebel forces where Americans had recently been kidnapped for ransom. The others agreed that they likely didn't take us because of my friend's imposing size. We were very fortunate that day. Story 12. When I was a kid, my dad would lead groups of college students on trips to Central and South America to build houses. One year, he decided we should take the bus from Guatemala City all the way to Mexico City. It was a long journey. As we reached the border, a soldier with a very large gun got on the bus and looked around. Seeing that we had about 15 young women on board, he stepped off and made a call. Soon after, a group of armed men boarded the bus and ordered all the men to get off and line up outside. I remember the tension in the air as we followed their instructions. The soldiers then crammed onto the bus, and we waited anxiously. Eventually, they got off, and we were able to continue on our way. It was a tense situation, and I could see my dad, the group's leader, looking very worried and sweating. This happened back in the late 80s, when we'd heard a lot of concerning stories about the region. And just to clarify, we rode the bus, not any chickens. That was a mistake in my earlier wording. Story 13. I booked an Airbnb in Chicago, expecting a clean, well-equipped home with a few other guests. But when I arrived, I found the place was run down and dirty, with broken appliances and no clean drinking water. Worse, there were over 15 people staying there, crammed into bunk beds in multiple rooms. I soon learned that the neighborhood was quite sketchy. Just the night before, 3 housemates had been mugged walking from the train. That evening, I heard gunshots nearby while sitting in the tiny makeshift living room. I immediately decided this wasn't safe and moved to a hostel, fighting to get a refund from the Airbnb host. What was supposed to be a relaxing trip quickly turned into a nightmare. Story 14. I was volunteering in a small village in Romania, helping to build an extension for a local school. As the day was winding down, I decided to take a short walk to the nearby shop to get some water. On my way, a car suddenly sped past me, then abruptly braked and reversed back down the road, pulling up alongside me. The occupants started insisting that I get in their car, claiming they wanted to show me their cool things like radios, cars, and knives. They kept slowly following me, repeatedly demanding that I get in, until I was able to make it back to my group. For the next couple of days, the same car continued driving by and stopping outside where we were staying, sometimes for up to 30 minutes at a time. The whole experience was incredibly creepy, and I can't help but feel it could have ended very badly. Story 15. I've done a lot of traveling through Europe, and the only time I've ever truly felt uncomfortable was when I was groped on the metro in Rome. The train car was packed with people, and I felt a hand press against my back. At first, I thought it might just be an accident due to the crowded conditions, but then the hand slid between me and the person next to me, reaching around to near my stomach. I started to suspect it might be a pickpocket, but when the hand grabbed my breast, I knew this was no accident. I was trapped, unable to turn around and confront the person. In that moment, every Italian word I knew fled my mind, and I felt paralyzed, like a bucket of scalding water had been dumped over my head. The ride felt like it lasted an eternity. As soon as the train stopped, I forced my way out of the car and into the fresh air. Rome is such a beautiful city, but that day it felt incredibly ugly. Story 16. I was taking the late bus back to my hotel in Kosovo one night around 3 a.m. As I approached the bus stop, a pack of wild dogs suddenly started chasing after me. I hurried as fast as I could, running all the way back to the hotel to get away from them. Later, while riding the train back to Bucharest from Moldova, an older woman started yelling at me in Russian, complaining that I hadn't made my bed properly. She watched over my shoulder the whole time until I fixed it to her satisfaction. Story 17. It was my first time visiting the bustling city of New York. My aunt and uncle, who both work in the financial district, had taken the whole week off to show my family and I around the island of Manhattan. We were enjoying a beautiful Tuesday morning, having just taken photos around the famous Wall Street area, when suddenly the peaceful scene was shattered. In the distance, we saw the first plane crash into the World Trade Center towers. Story 18. I had just experienced a disturbing incident of SA from a man at the Roma Termini station. Hoping to find some peace, I boarded my overnight train, only to be awakened by the sight of a strange man standing in my compartment door. He spoke in broken English, pointing to the beds and then sitting down next to me on my own bunk. I felt deeply unsettled, realizing my journey would not be the restful escape I had hoped for. Story 19. I was staying alone in a peculiar hostel in Barcelona. One morning, I woke up to find a man peering at me over a wooden divider in the shared room. Afraid of what he might do, I pretended to still be asleep. He watched me for nearly 2 hours until my alarm finally went off for an early train. I quickly packed my things and left the room, informing the owner on my way out, though I was in a hurry and didn't ask what would be done about the situation. Story 20. I was walking alone through the beautiful Tiergarten Park in Berlin, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. As I strolled along the path, I noticed a man standing on the edge, gazing off into the distance. When I passed him, he suddenly turned and started following me, keeping pace as I walked. I became uneasy and started taking a meandering route, even leaving and re-entering the park, but the man stayed with me the whole time. Eventually, I reached an area with sharp turns and heavy foliage. I seized the opportunity to lose sight of him and pressed myself against a corner, my hand gripping a pocket knife I had purchased in Switzerland. After a tense moment, the man emerged from the path, looking confused, and when he spotted me, he quickly played it cool and continued walking, as if he hadn't been following me. I kept watching him, debating whether to confront him, but as a visitor to the country, I decided against it. Instead, I waited until I saw a large group of people leaving the park and blended in with them, finally losing the man outside the gardens. To this day, I have no idea why he was following me. I'm a fit young man, so I didn't seem like an easy target for a mugging. The whole experience left me unsettled, wondering what his motives could have been. Story 21. I was riding the crowded train in Osaka when I witnessed a disturbing scene. An older man was groping a young teenage girl standing next to him. The girl looked deeply uncomfortable, clearly holding back tears. I quickly pulled out my phone and started filming the man, which caused him to try hiding his actions with his other hand. Luckily, I was able to get my male friend to switch places with the girl, blocking the man's access. At the next stop, the creepy man got off the train. I checked on the girl, and she and her friends all expressed gratitude for our intervention. Sadly, I later learned that this type of public groping is not uncommon in Japan, and many people don't feel comfortable making a scene about it. The image of that poor girl's distressed face is seared into my memory. Story 22. I was walking through a town in Algeria when I noticed hardly anyone was out on the streets. As I ventured further, I saw a remarkably tall man approaching me with intent. He turned out to be an older gentleman with a long gray beard, wearing a gray tunic. He warned me in good English that I wasn't safe there and urged me to follow him. We walked a few blocks to a door, and he ushered me inside. There, I found a dozen men dressed in black, glaring at me. The gray-bearded man scolded them fiercely, but then one of the younger men brought out tea and cookies, and they soon warmed up to me. We ended up laughing and discussing American foreign policy over our tea. Eventually, the older man invited me to his apartment, which had an impressive library. I gave him a book I had finished, and he revealed that his younger brother, the leader of the radical group, had overheard them planning to kidnap me, but the older man had intervened, ensuring my safety from that point on. It was like Gandalf saving my life, and I even got a copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance out of the deal. Story 23. I recently traveled to Honduras. As I walked through the streets, I was surrounded by a swarm of children pleading for money. It was an overwhelming and upsetting experience. Later, my wife and I decided to venture out into the ocean. She was on a paddleboard while I was in a canoe. Unfortunately, she struggled to paddle back to shore and was being carried away by the current. Thankfully, she was able to hold on to me as I paddled us both safely back to land. I'm grateful my physical fitness at the time allowed me to rescue us from that precarious situation. Story 24. This is a story of how I ended up in a world of danger and bad decisions during a night out in Boquete, Panama. My friend and I were drinking with a group of people, and we got separated. Foolishly, we decided to walk to a gas station alone. There, I met a woman who offered to give us a ride back to her hostel. Big mistake. She turned out to be a coked-up, erratic driver who was clearly unstable. She started driving me away from town, and eventually, a large, menacing Panamanian man got into the car. I was trapped, my phone was dead, and I had no way to contact anyone. We ended up at a house that belonged to the woman's ex-husband, where I was confronted by an angry American man with a scary facial scar. He accused me of trying to sleep with his ex-wife in his own home. After calming down, the American revealed he was a drug runner, showing me a kilo of powder and a firearm. Then the woman came back and told me she thought I was an angel sent to help her commit a bad act. It was the most terrifying and bizarre night of my life. I somehow made it out of there alive, but the whole experience really showed me how quickly a night out can spiral into disaster when you're not careful. Story 25. I was walking with two other young, white female volunteers down a busy avenue in Rabat, Morocco. It was the Feast of the King, so the street was unusually empty. Suddenly, two men on a motorbike swerved over the median and pulled up beside us. The passenger jumped off and approached us, pulling out a machete from under his jacket. In a panic, my friends threw their belongings at him and ran off. He then turned to me, holding the blade to my neck. Thinking quickly, I scolded him in Arabic, using a local phrase about shame and Allah. To my surprise, this made the man sheepishly retrieve the dropped items and leave. Shaken, I rushed to a nearby pharmacy, where I met up with my friends. A kind woman offered to drive us home, but as she started speeding and ignoring traffic laws, we realized she might be trying to kidnap us. We jumped out of the moving vehicle and escaped unharmed, though our first international trip had taken an unexpectedly perilous turn. Story 26. Crossing the border from Ukraine into Russia at a small checkpoint was a harrowing experience in hindsight. There, men in urban camouflage and carrying AK-47 assault rifles demanded bribes and yelled at us in Russian while we were stranded in the middle of nowhere. It was a terrifying ordeal. The route we took through Russia from Ukraine is marked on a link, though I'm not sure if the roads have changed since then. At one point, we stopped to eat at an unusual kebab shop. It was a large metal drum with seating inside, like an above-ground tank propped up on a concrete pad just south of a gas station. Sadly, it seems that establishment is no longer there. Story 27. I was traveling in Costa Rica with two business colleagues who were there to potentially purchase a gentleman's club. We were staying at the Radisson Hotel and asked the concierge to get us a cab to the club. About 7 minutes into the drive, I realized we were no longer in a tourist area. The driver was whispering into his phone in Spanish and glancing at us in the rearview mirror, which made me uneasy. When we asked if we were almost there, he only replied, "Sí, uno momento," and continued whispering. It was clear we were being led somewhere dangerous. My colleagues grew concerned as well. One of them opened his briefcase and handed me a pen, telling me to use it to defend myself if needed. The other colleague then held his gold pen to the driver's neck and demanded we be taken back to the Radisson immediately. They also grabbed the driver's phone. Thankfully, we did make it back to the hotel safely. We decided to keep our valuables locked in the room, safe for the rest of the trip, before continuing on to the club. Looking back, I realize as a new traveler, I didn't fully grasp the risks of flaunting expensive items in an unfamiliar area. Story 28. In the summer of 2013, I traveled to the northernmost province of Zambia and spent time in the remote village of Lubwe. To reach Lubwe, we had to take a 12-hour charter bus ride from the capital city of Lusaka. This bus was in rough shape, minus cracked windows letting in cold air, livestock odors, overstuffed luggage, deafening music, and the front door held shut with a towel. In fact, the bus stalled several times even before leaving the station. Our departure was delayed by an hour and a half. The bus ride was uncomfortable for everyone, but especially for the more sheltered travelers in our group of about 11 people. As we finally left the station and made a wide turn onto the road, our driver's aggressive maneuver cut off a military vehicle. These angry soldiers in a Humvee forced our bus to stop, and a huge confrontation broke out between them and our bus crew. The soldiers even flashed weapons at us. Just as things were escalating, our bus suddenly took off, leaving the original crew behind. For a couple of hours, we had no idea where we were headed or what was happening. It was an incredibly stressful and uncertain situation, the most harrowing travel experience of my life, and it was an essential detail I had neglected to mention to my mother before returning the following summer. Story 29. During a volunteer trip to Guatemala, my friend and I went to see some Mayan ruins on a small island. We were looking for a bathroom and locals pointed us to one at the top of a mountain. We found a small building with no door and one toilet. My friend said she'd stand watch while I went first. As I was using the facilities, I suddenly heard my friend say I should hurry up. Then a man's voice shouted something in Spanish about permission. Out of nowhere, he barged in while I was midstream, pointing a very large gun at me. He was wearing some kind of uniform, so he may have been police. I quickly pulled up my pants, completely panicked. I grabbed my friend and kept apologizing to the man, saying, "Lo siento," over and over. We ran as fast as we could down the hill. The man was shouting after us, but he didn't follow. Although nothing terrible happened, I was terrified, and my poor friend still needed to use the restroom. Story 30. While traveling from Pereira to Buga in Colombia around the elections, I noticed the local police have a different approach to traffic stops. Instead of pulling people over, they simply wave drivers to the side of the road to check IDs. When the officers asked to see my identification, I only had my U.S. driver's license, not my passport. since this was my second visit. The police took my license and spoke with my girlfriend's father, who warned us we were about to be shaken down for a bribe. Sure enough, the officers returned and demanded 200,000 Colombian pesos to let us pass. I showed them my police badge, which seemed to change their tune, and they quickly let us continue on our way. Aside from this one incident, my time in the amazing country of Colombia has been very positive. Story 31. I was visiting Romania when some gypsies tried to sell me a baby. A woman who looked like she had been using drugs for years kept trying to hand me this tiny child, haggling with me in her own language. A group of children between the ages of 2 and 12 kept touching me, like they were appraising my clothes. I had to raise my voice and get serious before they finally left me alone. I went back to the village where I was staying with a friend and told our hosts about the bizarre attempted human trafficking. They explained that the child was most likely stolen from somewhere else in Romania. Apparently, it's a local racket, reselling newborn babies to tourists. The way they talked about it, you could tell this kind of thing happens all the time. Our hosts were very kind and hospitable people, but you could tell they had tough lives. Story 32. As a young 17-year-old tourist, I was using the public restroom near the Colosseum in Rome. While I was at one of the urinals, a strange man suddenly rushed in and stood right next to me. To my shock and horror, he started looking over the partition and violently pleasuring himself. I was just trying to finish up and get out of there, not wanting to make a mess or get involved with this bizarre situation. Suddenly, the Italian police came bursting in, yelling at me in rapid Italian. Raising my hands, I quickly told them I was American and spoke English. They checked my passport and then took the other man away. It was a highly unsettling and unpleasant experience that I'll never forget. Story 33. I traveled to Ukraine with my parents to visit the small villages where their own parents were born. Since we had no family in the area, we hired a guide to show us around. The country can be a bit tricky after all. As we were driving along the highway, we suddenly found ourselves stuck in traffic in the middle of nowhere. Our guide got out to take a look, then quickly jumped back in the car and made a U-turn, telling my mom we couldn't go to her mother's village. Apparently, we had encountered some kind of Russian military checkpoint, this being during the whole situation with Crimea. Story 34. I was really drunk in a suburb of Tokyo one night, and I was having trouble finding my way back to where I was staying. Everything looked unfamiliar, and I was too intoxicated to read the map properly. Luckily, someone came to try and help me get home, even though we couldn't understand each other since I don't speak Japanese and he didn't speak English. We went into a restaurant to see if anyone there could assist us, but when we walked in, I noticed the 3 men and 1 woman inside all had tattoos, which I knew was a bad sign. As soon as the man who was helping me tried to turn around and leave, the woman started yelling at him, and the men jumped up and grabbed him. She was also pointing and shouting at me. I didn't stick around to find out what was going on. I just bolted out of there as fast as I could, running through the back alleys and ditching my flip-flops along the way so I wouldn't make any noise. I eventually found my way back to where I was staying, and I left the area first thing the next morning. I'm not sure if those people were part of the Yakuza or anything like that, but I didn't want to take any chances. Story 35. I was riding the subway in New Delhi when my phone was stolen out of my pocket. I was able to grab one of the thieves, but he didn't have my phone. At the next stop, a crowd of commuters suddenly started beating him. The police arrived and continued assaulting the thief with cricket bats. We took him to the police station and told him to call his friend who had the phone, but the friend never showed up. The police then locked the thief in their office, and all I could hear were his screams. After a while, the officer brought the kid back into the room with my phone in a bag. He dumped a curry sauce all over the ground and made the thief eat it with a spoon. It was a bizarre ordeal, but at least I got my phone back in the end. Story 36. I was traveling through Guatemala, heading from Antigua to Guatemala City. Our driver took a shortcut called the Trap, and it was absolutely insane. We were barreling across rivers at 45 miles per hour since the bridges were out, and we were flung along the sides of 1,000-meter cliffs, going about 80 miles per hour on a sandstone road. My buddy actually passed out from the sheer terror of it all. When I asked the driver why we were going so fast, he said it was a trap after the sun went down. I didn't fully understand, was it vampires or something? Later, as we were driving at over 100 miles per hour near sunset, the driver admitted there were no monsters, just chicken buses, local buses that would run us off the road in the dark, with no lights. He said we'd have to pull over and camp until daylight to avoid them. I saw the wrecked remains of other SUVs like ours along the river below the road, and I started to believe him. Story 37. It was the middle of the night in Peru, and I was nearly jumped by a drug dealer who was high on substance. He had tried to get me to buy powder from him, but I refused. Luckily, another drug dealer who had sold me a handmade necklace earlier that day recognized me. This jewelry-making drug dealer put the other one in a serious headlock and yelled at him to back off, saving me from what could have been a deadly confrontation. Story 38. My first night in Canada back in 2014, I stayed in a cheap hotel in Montreal. It was your typical cheap hotel experience. The place had a smoky smell, and I could hear noises from the other rooms, but it had the essentials: an ensuite bathroom, free Wi-Fi, and a TV, which was all I needed after a long day of traveling. As I was sleeping, the bathroom door suddenly opened, and the light turned on. I was too scared to confront whoever it was, especially since I was sleeping without any clothes on. Through half-closed eyes, I saw a person standing in the doorway, facing towards me. They stood there for about 25 seconds, then the light went off, and they disappeared. I checked my phone, and it was around 2 a.m., but somehow, I managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I checked out as soon as I could. I never mentioned the incident to anyone. The bathroom had a strange setup. There was a small door leading from the corridor, which looked like it had been blocked off, as if there had been a closet there, and the bathroom was built over it. I couldn't understand why someone would enter that way into an occupied room. It was a bit unsettling, to say the least. Story 39. I was traveling in Budapest when something happened that still gives me chills. I was taken into a car by a group of people late at night. I don't know their full motives, but I knew I needed to get out. At a red light, I made a split-second decision. I pushed at the door and fell out of the car. I hit the pavement and badly cut my arm, but I scrambled to my feet and ran. I kept running until I reached a group of people, and by some miracle, someone called a cab. I paid to get back to my hostel and locked the door behind me. After that night, I learned something I wish I'd known sooner. Human trafficking and abduction attempts can and do happen, sometimes in unexpected places. That experience taught me to be hyper-aware of my surroundings, to travel with backup plans, and never to assume I'm safe because a place looks familiar. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, try to stay vocal, create a scene if you can safely do so, attract witnesses, and prioritize getting to public populated places. And if anything like this happens to you, please report it to local authorities and seek help as soon as you're able. I'm sharing this not to scare you, but because it happened to me and because awareness can save lives. Story 40. I was just a teenager when I went on a trip to Bali with my parents. Most of the vacation was wonderful, but on our last day, we decided to explore the bustling Kuta marketplace. As I looked at a vendor selling his wares, he started aggressively trying to make a sale. Suddenly, his friends surrounded me, with one asking what I had, and before I knew it, one of them grabbed my chest. I was absolutely terrified, trying to get away, when thankfully my mom swooped in and pulled me to safety. It was a harrowing experience that left me shaken. Story 41. When I was in high school, my best friend and I went on an exchange program to China for the summer. The program was pretty lax, with kids from all over the world, and they didn't keep a very close eye on us. One day, we went to a shopping mall, and two young Chinese girls, maybe in their late teens or early 20s, approached us. They seemed friendly and asked if we wanted to hang out with them. My friend was really excited, thinking it would be a chance to experience the local culture, but I had a bad feeling about it. As they led us through the mall and outside, I just knew something was wrong. I finally stopped my friend, and we told the girls we had to go. They looked disappointed but didn't try to stop us. Now that I'm older, I realize we were probably minutes away from falling victim to a scam, maybe even human trafficking. It's the closest I've ever come to being in real danger, and I still think about it a lot. I'm just glad my instincts kicked in and we got out of there. Story 42. I'm 20 years old, and while traveling in Barcelona, I decided to go clubbing with some new friends. Now, I'm not really the clubbing type, but I wanted to try it out. The friend I was traveling with didn't want to join, so I went out on my own from the hostel, which was a bit far from the city center. I ended up having a great time at the clubs, but when they started closing down, some new friends tried to convince me to hang out longer at their hostel. I declined and tried to take the metro back, but that had closed too. So I got on a bus, unsure of where to get off, and with no knowledge of Spanish, I ended up getting off a couple of stops too early and found myself being chased by a drunk person in the dark. I had no idea what to do, so I just clung to a light pole at the bus stop, crying, until the next bus came. Eventually, I made it safely back to my hostel, and I vowed to never go off on my own like that again. Story 43. I was on a road trip through Iceland with a friend. We stopped for the night at a large cabin called the Lambafell Hotel. That night, I had a vivid and unsettling nightmare. I was being pulled underwater in a mysterious Icelandic lake. The next day, as we continued our drive, my friend insisted we stop and hike up to a beautiful waterfall called Sistrafoss. When we reached the waterfall's source, a lake, I mentioned my disturbing dream about a similar body of water. As we approached the lake's edge, we found a sign detailing its history. A medieval monastery used to stand there, but nuns kept vanishing after venturing into the waters to bathe. Eyewitnesses claimed a ghostly hand would offer the nuns golden shoes, then drag them under. The lake was called Sistrafoss. To my horror, I experienced the same nightmare again at our next stop. I just wanted to get off that island as soon as possible after that unsettling experience. Story 44. I had a strange encounter on a recent trip. A friendly person speaking in broken English joined me for about half the journey before moving to another car. I didn't even realize anything had happened at the time. Unfortunately, they took my wallet, though I thankfully didn't have much cash on me. They didn't get my passport in case, which had my main cards and international driver's license. I did have to get a new military ID, but it could have been much worse. I guess these kinds of incidents happen more often than we'd like. From now on, I'll be sure to use a money belt when I travel. Story 45. I was visiting a small fishing town in Mexico with a class, staying with local families to learn about their culture and language. One day, I was sitting on the curb waiting for my host family when a homeless man approached and sat next to me. He began telling me his life story, which I thought was a genuine interaction. However, he then asked me for money, and when I refused and tried to leave, he grabbed my hair and pulled me to the ground. Luckily, the father of the family I was staying with saw what was happening, pulled the man away, and defended me right there on the street. Despite this incident, I've always felt incredibly safe in that town. The people truly care for one another, and I've returned many times, hoping to one day live there myself. Story 46. I was backpacking through Southeast Asia and ended up at a nightclub in Vietnam. As a backpacker, you often run into the same people along the way. That night, I didn't even want to go out, but a friend convinced me. We had a great time catching up with some guys we had met before. Before I knew it, it was 4 a.m. and I was far from my hostel. I tried to get a ride, but there were no taxis or ride shares available. My friend and I, two young blonde women, were stranded on the streets late at night. Some Vietnamese men on motorbikes offered us a ride, which we hesitantly accepted since we didn't know what else to do. They drove us to our hostel, but then tried to rob us as we got off. I immediately fought back, and a loud confrontation broke out with the men. Luckily, the hostel security heard the commotion and came to our aid, causing the men to flee. The security warned us to be more careful about getting rides from strangers in the future. It was a harrowing experience, and I can't believe how risky we were that night. Story 47. I was in Las Vegas, drunk and mouthing off, when some guys pulled a gun on me for refusing to buy their weed. I lied and said I'd get cash from an ATM, then just booked it and ran. They chased me for a while, but I managed to get away. Looking back, I probably should have just given them the money instead of being so reckless. That whole trip was pretty wild. Mine and my mates were driving an RV around the western US and getting into all kinds of trouble. We did a lot of dumb stuff that trip. Story 48. I was visiting Madrid with my family, and we stopped at a cafe to grab a bite to eat. After I finished my sandwich, I was waiting by the counter for the rest of my family to finish up. That's when a woman approached me, saying I reminded her of one of her friends. I politely smiled and nodded, not really knowing what to say. She asked for my name, and just as my family started to leave, I said goodbye to her, but the whole time she just stared at me intently. As we went outside to catch a cab, she followed us. I got into the cab, and while we waited at a red light, I saw her standing there, staring at me with this strange, intense look on her face. She even seemed to be trying to memorize the taxi's license plate number. It was a bit unsettling, and I spent the whole ride worried that she might try to follow us or show up at our hotel. Story 49. On a trip to Spain years ago, my family and I had a strange encounter on an overnight train ride. My wife, sister, and young daughter were sharing a sleeper car with a nice couple from New Zealand. Late one evening, my sister and I went to the cafe car and noticed a rowdy group of Spanish passengers who seemed quite drunk. Later that night, my sister told us that someone had tried to enter our compartment. As my wife and I processed this, the Kiwi traveler and I realized we were the only ones who hadn't heard the commotion. I checked the door, which was locked, then went into the hallway. To my shock, the walls were spattered with blood, not a horror movie amount, but a significant trail, as if someone had been badly injured and trying to find help while the train was moving. I grabbed a bunch of napkins and used them to open doors, trying not to spread the blood further. No one seemed to know what had happened or cleaned it up. My best guess is there was some kind of accident or altercation with the drunk passengers earlier. Needless to say, we were relieved to get off that train a couple hours later when we arrived in Portugal. Story 50. I'll never forget what happened to me and my friend in Bogota. We were trying to find our way to a museum when we took a wrong turn and ended up looking lost with a map, standing out as obvious tourists. Suddenly, I found myself pressed against a wall with a knife at my throat. The muggers took everything we had on us, but to my surprise, one of them went through my wallet and gave back all my credit cards, ID, and passport. I guess you could call him a good guy mugger in a way, even though the whole experience was terrifying. Story 51. Was backpacking through Thailand, staying at a budget hostel, the kind of place you pick because it's cheap, not because it's fancy. You know the type. Peeling paint, flickering lights, thin walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a bed for the night. Sometime after midnight, my friend was jolted awake, not by noise, not by a dream, but by the hostel staff physically shaking them. Half asleep and disoriented, they were told, "Get up, get your things, move now." No explanation, no time to think, just panic. My friend quickly gathered their backpack and stumbled into the hallway, joining a handful of other confused guests being shepherded down the stairs and up to a different floor. At first, it almost felt like a fire drill. People looked around nervously, whispering, "What's going on? Did someone break in? Is there a fire?" Hours later, the truth came out. The hostel had been using gas to fumigate an entire floor because of a serious bed bug infestation, and somehow, by mistake, they had checked in new guests to that same floor. My friend was one of them. Staff only realized their error after guests had already been sleeping in the contaminated rooms. By then, a few people had already been harmed by exposure. The details were hushed, unclear, but the shaken looks on people's faces in the morning said enough. My friend was lucky; they were pulled out just in time, but that night left a deep impression on us. In travel, you prepare yourself for the obvious dangers. Pickpockets, scams, maybe food poisoning, but sometimes it's the very place you trust to keep you safe, the roof over your head, that turns out to be the most dangerous. That hostel taught me something I've carried with me ever since. When you go for the cheapest option, you're not just saving money. Sometimes you're gambling with comfort, health, and even safety. I still travel on a budget, but I always double-check reviews, look for red flags, and trust my gut, because no overnight stay should end with staff shaking you awake in the middle of the night and the smell of chemicals still hanging in the air. Story 52. When I was in Arusha, Tanzania, I had one of those moments that changed the way I think about travel. I was walking through the city when a street vendor started following me, holding out cheap, mass-produced bracelets. I smiled, said no thanks, and kept walking. But he kept following. I told him again, firmer this time. Still, he wouldn't leave. With every step, his tone got sharper, his face angrier, and I realized I was alone in an unfamiliar city, with a stranger who refused to back off. My heart was racing. Finally, I swallowed my pride, handed him the equivalent of $2, and he disappeared into the crowd. Looking back, it was a coming-of-age moment for me. It wasn't about the money. It was about fear, control, and learning that sometimes the smart choice is to let go of your pride to protect your safety. That $2 bought me peace of mind and a lesson I'll never forget. Story 53. In the late 1980s, during El Salvador's brutal civil war, my mom traveled there on a missionary trip. One morning, her group stopped in a small seaside village for sightseeing. The streets were silent, the houses empty. They thought it was simply Sunday morning, when most villagers would be at church. As they walked toward the cliff overlooking the ocean, armed soldiers appeared and stopped them. The soldiers claimed the cliff was unstable and unsafe, yet their own jeep was parked right there on the edge. Something felt wrong. Later, the group rested on the far side of the cove. One missionary pulled out a pair of binoculars. What he saw made his stomach drop. The villagers weren't in church. They were lying lifeless at the bottom of the cliff. The army had rounded up the entire village, massacred them, and tried to pass it off as an accident. That same trip, the soldiers kidnapped one of the missionaries from their hostel. He was a Hispanic man with long hair. The army mistook him for a rebel fighter. For 3 days, he was beaten and tortured before finally being released back to the group. My mom rarely spoke about that trip, but when she did, it was with a heavy voice, a reminder of the human cost of war and how ordinary people can be caught in the most horrific of circumstances. Today, El Salvador is a different country, far removed from that dark chapter. But her story remains a haunting lesson about the realities of war and the importance of remembering those who never had the chance to tell their own stories. Story 54. I was out in Iceland, miles from the nearest town, and felt like doing something dumb and peaceful. I took a nap on the beach, totally alone, sky overhead, ocean noises. When I woke up, I had that prickly feeling like somebody was watching me. I rolled over, and there he was, a man standing maybe 10 feet away, just staring. No wave, no smile, nothing. Then, out of nowhere, he yells, "Gotcha," and sprints to his car. He peels away, tires squealing, and disappears down the road. I sat there for a long time, heart doing flips, because what do you even do after that? Maybe it was a prank. Maybe he was warning me off private land. Maybe it was nothing. Whatever it was, it left me totally spooked, and I haven't napped alone on a beach since. Story 55. We were in Tokyo in 2011, planning something simple and fun, a trip to the Ghibli Museum. My daughter and I had planned it for weeks, and at the last minute my husband's schedule freed up so he could join us. It was supposed to be one of the highlights of our trip. On the way back, as our subway train rushed through the tunnels, it suddenly stopped. At first we thought it was just a delay. Then the car started rocking, gently at first, then violently. For 10 minutes the world shook. We grabbed the poles, bracing ourselves, watching the fear spread through the faces of the passengers. After half an hour, the train limped to the next station. When we stepped onto the platform, the announcements came. The trains were shutting down. Earthquake damage. We walked back to our hotel through the quiet, uneasy streets. Once inside, we waited in the lobby for hours while the building was inspected. Even after we were cleared to return to our room, the aftershocks kept coming. For days, the ground felt unsteady. It wasn't until we flew home that we fully grasped what had happened. We had been in Japan during the Tohoku earthquake, one of the most devastating in modern history. Thousands of lives were lost, entire towns swept away. We were lucky. All we carried home was a frightening memory of a rocking train car and a deeper respect for the resilience of the Japanese people who endured so much more. Story 56. It was past 1 a.m. in a hostel bar in England when things started to turn ugly. Two large, drunk men were harassing the bartenders, groping them, ignoring their protests, getting louder and angrier by the minute. You could see the fear on the girls' faces. There were maybe 8 of us in the room. We exchanged quick looks, all realizing the same thing. If we didn't step in, it was only going to get worse. One of the guys stood up and told the men to leave. The rest of us tightened our grips around our beer bottles, holding them by the neck like improvised weapons. I remember my heart pounding, my mouth dry. I was ready to fight, but every part of me prayed it wouldn't come to that. For a few tense seconds, the air was heavy. Then the men shouted in another language, slammed their glasses down, and stormed out. The bartenders immediately locked the door, and the whole room seemed to exhale at once. They thanked us, handed out free beers, and we spent the next couple of hours just decompressing, laughing shakily, trading stories, and trying to forget how close we had come to real violence. Looking back, it was one of the scariest moments of my life, but also one of the most meaningful. That night, I learned that sometimes courage doesn't mean you're not afraid, it means stepping up anyway. And I even gained a lifelong friend in one of the bartenders. Story 57. For a few years, my mom and I lived in Central Asia. Out of all my memories from that time, one stands out more than any other. One evening, by accident, we ended up near the president's summer residence just as his motorcade arrived. In seconds, soldiers lifted their rifles, aiming right at us from barely 10 meters away. I can still see it clearly, the uniforms, the barrels of the guns, the tense silence. But the strange thing is, I wasn't afraid. Not at all. Looking back now, I'm not sure if it was innocence or just the calm that sometimes comes when fear should take over. But that surreal moment, rifles pointed at us, and me standing there steady, has stayed with me ever since. Story 58. We were in Pisco Elqui, Chile, a perfect place for stargazing. The sky was so clear you could practically feel each star. A Chilean couple from our hostel and I climbed a nearby hill to watch the sky and chat. As we sat there, everything seemed normal. The night, the conversation, the cold air. Then I noticed something strange to my left, a void, like a patch of silence where there should have been rustling or distant voices. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. I remembered a line from a Terry Pratchett book about assassins blending into a landscape, and embarrassed, I asked casually, "Do pumas ever come through here?" The couple shrugged. "Yes, there are a few, but they usually keep to the next valley." I slid to the other side of the group, but the feeling didn't go away. Maybe it was nothing. Imagination, nerves, the perfect stillness of the desert night. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I didn't sleep well that night. The stars were beautiful, but that silence stayed with me long after we drove back down the hill. Story 59. I went on a European vacation with my family to visit my brother in Belgium. My dad is quite meticulous. He had read extensively about our destinations and constantly warned us about the dangers of thieves and pickpockets, especially at the train stations in Paris. As an American who looks very Slavic and wearing ill-fitting thrift store clothes, I got off the train at Gare du Nord first, carrying my nephew's stroller. Suddenly, I noticed 2 rough-looking men eyeing me from the crowd. They approached me from behind, and one of them put his arm up in a halt gesture. To my shock, I saw he had a gun in a shoulder holster. He started speaking to me in rapid French, which I didn't understand. My dad quickly intervened, pushing me past the men. The armed man grabbed my arm, but I yanked it away. My whole family gathered around and we started arguing with the man who claimed to be a police officer. He showed us a cheap-looking armband which my dad and I didn't recognize as valid identification. Eventually, the man produced a proper badge and ID, and I handed over my passport. Relieved, we were allowed to continue on our way, but I realized I had accidentally blown the cover of these plainclothes police officers patrolling the station. Later, as we were leaving Paris for Switzerland, the police zeroed in on me again on the train. But this time, I proactively showed my passport, and they quickly moved on, seeming surprised by my forthcoming manner. I guess I fit the profile of the Eastern European criminals they were on the lookout for. It was a tense experience, but Paris was still a lovely destination overall. Story 60. In the summer of 2005, I was traveling in France with my family, just a few weeks after the London transport bombings. Security across Europe was tense. On the day of our departure, the airport suddenly erupted into chaos. A voice over the loudspeaker ordered everyone to evacuate. Heavily armed police and a bomb squad rushed in, moving with urgency toward an abandoned piece of luggage. We stood outside with hundreds of other travelers, watching, not knowing if this was the real thing. Every minute felt heavy, stretched out by fear. After what felt like forever, word came back. It was a false alarm, just an unattended bag. The tension broke instantly, shoulders dropped, nervous laughter spread, and people slowly filed back inside. We made it home safely that day, but that experience, being part of a bomb scare in the shadow of a real attack, showed me just how fragile that sense of normal travel can be. Story 61. My sister and I were staying at a riad in Marrakesh, Morocco. If you've ever been there, you know the streets can feel like a maze, winding alleys, tiny shops, and doorways that all look the same. Our taxi dropped us off as close as it could, then tried to point us in the right direction. We were dragging our bags through these narrow walkways, not entirely sure where to go, when a couple of men appeared. They smiled and offered to guide us. At first it sounded tempting. We were lost, tired, and had no idea which way was right, but I noticed our driver was shaking his head firmly. He kept telling us not to go with them. The men grew more insistent, but we thanked them and pressed on. After a confusing walk through turns and alleys, we finally found our riad, nowhere near where they had been trying to lead us. Even now, I wonder what might have happened if we'd gone with them. Maybe nothing, maybe something worse. What I do know is that moment taught me an important lesson. When you're traveling, trust your instincts, and sometimes trust the warnings of the people who are really looking out for you. Story 62. I flew into a European city after a multi-hour delay and didn't get to the hostel until around 1 a.m. I was tired, a little disoriented, and riding the subway from the airport toward the center. A few rows down sat a man facing me. At first I thought it was nothing. Then he kept staring. Not glancing, not people watching. Staring. My stomach tightened. He leaned to the side and flashed this slow, sinister smile. It was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. I panicked, pretended to be on the phone, and got off at my stop as fast as I could, checking over my shoulder until I lost him in the crowd. I made it to my hostel fine, but that feeling, that instant where your body tells you something is wrong, has stayed with me. Sometimes the safest move is to trust the gut you didn't know you had. Story 63. It was around 10 p.m. in Bali. We'd spent the day surfing and were finishing a late dinner, just relaxing and swapping stories. Then something odd began outside. Men in white robes, carrying large gleaming blades, walked up and down the street. They started ordering the restaurant owner to turn off every light. Within minutes, more robed figures arrived. They weren't quietly asking. They were shutting down lights, breaking windows to get into locked shops, and moving with a desperate intensity I'd never seen before. People were shouting, and a sense of panic spread through the streets. Locals were telling us things like, "No cars, don't drive," and speaking of sacrifices and spirits being released. I'm not an expert on local belief. This is what we were told in the moment. Our hotel was about a quarter-hour drive away. With the streets dark and militants of some sort blocking the road, we debated what to do. Walk, hide, climb fences, and cross fields? Then a man named Wayan, a local, appeared and offered to help. He said he knew the route and could get us home. We tried to drive through, but when we approached the robed men, they swarmed the car, pounding on the windows and doors. For a beat, it felt like we'd be trapped. Wayan slammed the accelerator and tore away. The sound of his engine and the squeal of tires felt like the only barrier between us and a very frightening outcome. We made it back to the hotel, shaken, adrenaline high, and thankful. Later, we learned that locals were performing a ritual that night. People mentioned masks, offerings, and the idea that certain spirits needed appeasing. I'm cautious about using specific names or explaining practices I don't fully understand. What stuck with me was the surreal mix of devotion, fear, and the way the whole town obeyed. That night taught me something about traveling. Sometimes you witness things you'll never fully understand. And part of respect is not turning those moments into exoticized stories. I walked away safe, a little wiser, and with one unforgettable Balinese night forever lodged in my memory. Story 64. I was traveling across Cambodia when I stopped at Preer Vihear, a temple site on the border with Thailand that's been disputed for years. From where I stood, the landscape looked quiet, almost peaceful. My driver started talking with some armed guards, then pointed up the hill. Curious, I asked what was going on. He handed me a pair of binoculars. Through the lenses, I saw them. The Thai army, not far away, rifles aimed in our direction. My stomach dropped. The driver didn't need to say a word. We jumped back into the car and got out of there fast. Looking back, I realize how close I was to being in the middle of a standoff I had no business wandering into. It's one of the scariest moments I've had traveling, and a reminder that borders can be more than just lines on a map. Story 65. Hiking Fox Glacier in New Zealand with my boyfriend was supposed to be one of those once-in-a-lifetime adventures. The ice stretched out like a frozen ocean, jagged and glistening in the weak sunlight. We were tired but exhilarated as we neared the end of the trek, maybe a kilometer from the exit. Then, without warning, came the crack. Loud, sharp, like a gunshot. The stairs beneath my boyfriend's feet gave way, and in an instant, he was gone. I lunged, grabbing his hand, but the glacier was slick with meltwater. My numb, frozen fingers couldn't hold on. His slipped through mine, and I watched in horror as he tumbled nearly 10 meters down the crevice, bouncing, hitting chunks of ice, before coming to rest on a wedge of ice just before a sheer cliff. I can still hear the sound of my own screams echoing down that crevice, desperate and helpless. By some miracle, he was alive, bruised, bloodied, and shaken, with injuries that still trouble his shoulder and knee to this day, but alive. That moment taught me two things I'll never forget. The glacier is more dangerous than it looks, and the line between beauty and disaster is razor thin. I walked away with a new respect for nature, and a gratitude that the man I love was still beside me. Story 66. I was relaxing on a secluded beach in Playa del Carmen, taking in the sun and scrolling through my phone. Suddenly, a man approached me and spoke in Spanish, asking for the time. Though I had my phone, I simply told him I didn't know. He lingered, refusing to leave. Thankfully, a man I had briefly met earlier came running over, greeting me warmly. As he reached me, the other man hurried off, disappearing into a nearby alley with two more unsavory characters. I was incredibly grateful for the timely arrival of my new acquaintance. As that alley was out of sight of the main beach area, I could have been in real danger there alone. Story 67. During my time living in China for over a decade, I encountered some truly unsettling experiences, and they often involved expats from other countries rather than the local Chinese people. One particular incident that stands out was when I met an individual from New Zealand who became obsessed with me. This person stalked me, threatened my family, and even posted horrible lies about me online. Thankfully, they were eventually deported. Back in the early 2000s, when I first went to work in China, the standards for foreign workers, including teachers, were alarmingly low. Individuals with unrelated diplomas or even fake degrees could easily secure teaching jobs, and their concerning behavior often went unnoticed. Many Chinese people at the time believed that all foreigners were eccentrics, and they were willing to overlook even violent, alcoholic, or perverted individuals as just being foreign. I encountered numerous truly disturbed individuals who were essentially evading normal society by living in China. While things have become more strict in recent years, especially after Beijing hosted the Olympics in 2008, the situation was quite concerning back then. It was even possible for high school dropouts to purchase fake degrees and use them to obtain legal working visas in China. This loophole continued until around 2008, when the authorities started cracking down on these shady practices, though they haven't been completely eliminated. Story 68. Driving from Kingman to Tucson is a long-haul, endless desert, stretches of nothing. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, our car broke down. We managed to coast into a little spot with "Nowhere AZ" painted right on the side of the building. It looked abandoned, rundown, the kind of place you'd expect in a horror movie. I whispered to my friend, "This feels wrong. This feels dangerous." And sure enough, when we tried to call for help, there was no signal. Then the door creaked open and two rough-looking men walked out. My stomach dropped. But instead of trouble, they brought tools and snacks. They not only fixed the car, but handed treats to the kids in the back seat. Smiling, they got us running again. A few miles down the road, the car broke down again, and as luck would have it, the same two men pulled up behind us. Once more, they fixed it. No money asked, just help given. We made it home safely, humbled. That night taught me something I'll never forget. Appearances can deceive. What looked like the beginning of a nightmare turned into an act of pure kindness. Story 69. When I was just 6 or 8 years old, my family traveled a lot. We spent a few weeks in Thailand, and I had the same unsettling experience almost every day. Whenever we'd go out to the city or shopping malls, local men would approach me and say, "Come be my baby," trying to lure me towards them. This happened time and time again. A few men even asked my parents how much they'd be willing to sell me for. Needless to say, I was never allowed to leave my parents' sight. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but looking back now, I find those encounters absolutely disgusting and disturbing. To this day, I'm still reluctant to wander around on my own in that area. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.